the fact that so many of you have come here today for this Azkara2 and my father-in-law is a testament to the relationship and connection that he had with each and every one of you. No disrespect to the current administration, but I've never seen the shul at all. Departing from my normal speaking style, and in deference to the Wiccan family style of being prepared, well prepared, I've written out my speech well in advance. I feel first off I should apologize to friends and family members of my father-in-law, Rabbi Jerry Witkin, alav shalom, for anything I may say about him which is either exaggerated, understated, or in some way inconsonant with your memories of him. As the most recent inductee into the Witkin clan, and having known my father-in-law Jerry Witkin for only the last 2 years that Zahab and I have been married, not including the undetermined amount of time we were dating, I have had a shorter relationship with him than almost all other family members and friends gathered here this evening for this Shloshim commemoration. However, despite the unfortunately brief amount of time that I knew my father-in-law, qualitatively, it was a rich and meaningful period. As a result of a number of life events, including Manda's preparation for Aliyah, his granddaughter Sarah Leah's birth, and tragically his illness, Zahab and I ended up spending a good bit of time with her father at her parents' house on Henry Road before they made Aliyah. Through the course of numerous Shabbatot and Yom Tovim, and in particular last Pesach, we were regaled with his ever-abundant and entertaining reminiscences. Stories about his family while growing up in Bensonhurst, his father's halachim business, the people and events from a variety of camps that he's worked for, his trials and travails working at YU, Turo, the Board of Ed, his stories of the Rav, lively discussions about Israel politics and his favorite Jewish organizations, and numerous divrei Torah and insights. Through these accounts and nostalgia and the time we shared, I had the opportunity to get to know my father-in-law, grow close to him, appreciate him, admire him, and love him. These were times that I will always treasure. I will never forget my amazement, despite Zahaba's numerous warnings, the first time I was taken down to the basement of her parents' house and was introduced to the Jerry Witkin Historical Archives. Carefully positioned around the room were neatly stacked and organized folders containing things such as phone bills from Bell Telephone from the 1950s, letters delivered to the house on which, for example, he had written in his impeccably neat handwriting, received March 24th, 1975, and carefully organized newspapers such as those proclaiming Neil Armstrong's landing on the moon. And then there were some stories. My nephew Shimmy Steinmetz was telling Zadie about his report on penicillin, and lo and behold, Zadie just happened to have in his collection the original newspaper article on the development of penicillin from the 1940s. My father-in-law was a collector. He held on to things. The oft-noted pasuk in Vayishlach, dealing with the struggle of Yaakov with the Sarah Shel Esav, says, "Vayivaser Yaakov levado, vayavek ishimo." And Yaakov was left alone, and a man struggled with him. There's a Gemara in Chulin, which gives an explanation. Amar Rabbi Elazar, Shenishtayer al Pachim Ktanim. Rabbi Elazar explains that Yaakov remained alone on the other side of the river because he forgot some small jars there and had ventured back alone to retrieve them. The Gemara goes on to conclude, Mikan l'tzadikim shechav aleim mamonam yoter migufam. From here we see that righteous individuals hold their possessions to be dearer to them than their own bodies. This presumably derived from the fact that Yaakov was willing to put himself in a position of danger by venturing back alone to retrieve these relatively minor and insignificant items. The Gemara continues and asks, the Kol Kach Lama, why should this be the case? We would have thought that righteous people would care less about their material. People don't take them. In certain ways, my father-in-law reminded me of my father, alav shalom. Everyone who knew my father-in-law will tell you that he was friendly, charismatic, warm and engaging, and that he loved people. Whether it was a close friend, his mechanic, his accountant, a frequent visitor to his home, or and made it, He was a true Ish Shalom, and in turn he was beloved by those whose lives touched. Anyone who knew my father-in-law well knows that he was also an Ish Emes. He was honest and forthright in his speech, in his actions, and in his thinking. He detested falsehood, deception, and dishonesty in any form. I recall his chagrin as he related to me how, in his work at the Board of Ed, he had the misfortune of having to deal with certain frum individuals who were less than honest and who tried to take advantage of the system for their own financial gain. Although I can't speak from first-hand knowledge, from the distaste conveyed as he related these stories and others, I know that he must have been impeccably honest in his work and in his dealings with other people. Having no guile, he spoke from his heart and spoke his mind in a straightforward, unabashed way. When he felt that leaders and representatives of certain Jewish institutions and organizations were being less than forthright, he called them on it. He wrote letters, many of which Zahava found during the course of Shiva, spoke out, urged our political and religious leaders to take a stand, that they should speak out and tell things as they are instead of bowing to social or political pressures or personal expediencies. It never ceased to make his blood boil when he was told by rabbis, speakers, and lecturers that it was complicated, when it involved the question of defending Jewish lives in Eretz Yisrael, freeing Israeli soldiers held captive, or advocating for the release of Jonathan Pollard. Regarding such, my father-in-law spoke out clearly, strongly, and honestly, and expected the same from our leaders. It was a simple question for him. Every Jew must do what he can to help another Jew. As his Rebbe Rav Soloveitchik before him had taught, and following in the path of Moshe Rabbeinu, Jewish leadership is about serving Klal Yisrael and their needs, not about being popular or well-liked. If I can paraphrase Mordechai's admonishment of Esther in the Megillah, Al tadami b'nafshech li'malei beis hamalchus. Don't think that you can hide behind political position and office. U'mi yodea im leis kazos higat l'malchus. And who knows if it was just for the very purpose of speaking up at a critical time, such as this one, that you attained your position of leadership to begin with. Along these lines, and like Yaakov Avinu, the paradigm of the Ish Emes, my father-in-law truly valued his possessions, even the Pachim Gitanim. His collections were, in the truest and fullest sense, his. L'fi she'ein hoshtin yedehem begezel. There was no dishonesty, no deceit involved in attaining them. He felt connected to them since they were earned and achieved through his honest work and toil, and had no taint of iniquity or impropriety associated with them. They represented what he worked hard for and the honesty and morality of how he worked. He therefore could truly and fully appreciate their value, even of the smallest and most insignificant item amongst them, the Pachim Gitanim. These were the Pachim Gitanim. Perhaps the most beloved of all his possessions, as my brother-in-law Joel has mentioned, were his notes from the years that he spent in the Ravshir. Notebook after notebook of painstakingly exact, mostly verbatim transcriptions of his dear Rebbe's words and thoughts, conveyed through my father-in-law's clear and fluid handwriting. After 2 hours straight of writing, he reported that he felt like his hand would fall off. And my father-in-law was no complainer. And of course, at the top of each page, the day, date, time, and place of the shir and its duration. Leaping through some of them during Shiva and Eretz Yisrael, I felt awed and overwhelmed by the patience and the devotion that went in to create these volumes. These were his prized possessions. He held on to these possessions the closest. Dearer to him than all his possessions, though, was his family. His wife, my mother-in-law, his children, his sons and daughters-in-law, and grandchildren. His children sought out his counsel and always looked forward to spending time with him, and appreciated his warm, caring demeanor, his true concern, and his intelligent advice. I was only able to witness it to a limited degree, unfortunately, but I've heard from others how his grandchildren also yearned to spend time with him, studying, sharing what they learned, and he in turn appreciated each one of them for their own areas of strength and abilities. I remember on one occasion, I think it was right before my marriage to Zahav actually, after arguing a political point in a heated and vociferous way with one of my soon-to-be brothers-in-law, my future father-in-law turned to me, worried that I may get the wrong idea, and perhaps out of concern for my own future safety as well, and said, "Don't misunderstand. I disagree with him vehemently, but he's a gem, and he has a heart of gold, and will do anything for anyone." I've heard people say that my father-in-law treated his sons and daughters-in-law like his children. I disagree. He treated us better than his children. Throughout his illness, we all held on to him as long as we could. But, alas, he could hold on to us no longer. It was his time to go. Now we can no longer hold on to him physically, but we can hold on to our memories of him, the ideals he stood for, his honesty, his kindness, and consideration of others, the positive impact he had on all who he touched, his Torah, and to the people, his wife, my mother-in-law, his children, sons and daughters-in-law, and grandchildren. These are his legacy and the things we can and should hold on to and cherish. Family and friends have been going through a difficult period of mourning since my beloved father-in-law's passing a little more than a month ago. As time passes, each of us in his and her own time, and each in his and her own way, should find the things that we can hold on to, and through which we can still feel connected to him. And to incorporate some of my brother-in-law Joel's ideas as we move away from the Zecher L'Churban and remembering the loss, we move more towards a Zecher L'Mikdash and actively creating ways in which we can positively remember and connect to my father-in-law. And perhaps the most important way in which we can connect is by each of us connecting to one another. I feel this would be the most fitting way to remember and cherish him. I would just like to introduce our Aunt Pearlie, my father-in-law's sister.
For accompanying me up here. I had the misfortune last week of spraining an ankle. And she and my other children, of course, naturally are very concerned with my safety. And I thank you. Achi hayakar v'ha'ahuv, my brother, Harav Yerachmiel Binyamin, Zichrono Livracha, Ben Harav Zalman Tzvi, Rachalea Vitkin, Alehem HaShalom, Zichrono Livracha, lovingly called Jerry, and then Uncle Jerry, and then Danny. And after a while, Z, by his beloved and outstanding grandchildren. To know Jerry was to love him. With his sweet and gracious smile and his hakarat hatov for everyone. I joined this massive assemblage in sadness and in grief to pay tribute to a man who, although not a biological brother, was the only brother I ever had. He was like a brother to me, this brother.